Mike? Oh, that's a new sound.
We're getting welcomed in by Mike.
Is that Michael Kaye? Is he? What are you getting? A call? You got to take a call before you up on with us, Kaye?
How you guys doing?
Good, Mike. Good to see you. Well, all right, let's start out. We got a little off track with the ringtone. Well, what is the ringtone, by the way?
Oh, no, that was just an alarm that told me when the show started.
I got you.
I wanted to mention some music. That's my Stone Cold Steve Austin Glass Shadow.
Yes. I got Matthew McConaughey. All right. So
I like it.
Obviously, week 3 of the preseason, we're going up the Jersey Turnpike. All 3 of us. Jody might be there. Might be there.
As a fan, drinking, which you guys will not be allowed to do. Sorry about that.
I don't know.
Never seems to stop John. I don't know.
I might sneak. Will not confirm or deny. But when you think about the final preseason game, and it's a little bit different because it is week 3 instead of week 4 of the preseason, Mike. But I always think about sort of these weird, maybe a little bit off the beaten path kind of things. And one of them is, who are you going to hide? Who was that player that you want to get? Might be on the back end of the 53, might be on the practice squad. Who do you think the Eagles don't want to showcase so they can keep them around?
Coyote.
There we go. I like it.
That's been an obvious one. He's a guy who played tackle at Buffalo. He's played pretty well at guard. They've been using him a lot at right guard based on what I've seen. He strikes me as that Suo Opeta, Nate Herbig, undrafted flavor of the year, who they really like and think they can develop long term. I think they'd like to sneak him onto the practice squad. I think if you're keeping Andre Dillard, you're keeping 10 offensive linemen because he really has no versatility behind the starting group. And so I think, they're okay at guard. They're going to keep Suo Opeta and Nate Herbig. If Landon Dickerson's activated from PUP, then he'll be there and he'll take on one of those spots. But I think if you're going to keep Dillard, you also have to keep Jack Driscoll and Brett Toth. And I think Toth has really earned a job over the last month. So, yeah, I think Coyote, not ugly, is the guy that I would probably say. Look, it would have been Tyree Jackson, although that would have been impossible. I think Jack Stahl's another guy who's come on late who – you're going to have to keep Tyree Jackson on the 53 if you want to be able to bring him back at some point in the year. Do you keep 4 tight ends just to have those numbers at the time? I don't know if you're risking another position to the waiver wire when you have so many injuries on defense. And injuries are going to factor into this 53 cut. While the Eagles don't have any major injuries, they still have roster numbers to manage. And I think if you look at defense, you got Davian Taylor and Jannard Avery injured. You've got at safety, you've still got Roddy McLeod, even if you bring him back from PUP. He's probably not going to play right away. At corner, you've got Craig James, who I'm sure they really wanted to make this roster. So maybe you have to keep an extra corner because he's been dealing with a foot injury. There's a lot going on, and I think there are going to be 2 or 3 guys that we think did everything they could to earn the roster spot that might fall by the wayside.
John just talked about hiding a guy. Well, the Eagles have been hiding all preseason, and their defensive coordinator has specifically said, deception is my bag. That's what I bank on. I'm not going to let you guys see anything because when we come out and we start playing games that matter, you're not even going to see us coming. So how does Jonathan Gannon handle this final game? Because he's been keeping things behind everybody's back throughout. He's not about to showcase anything. How do you make decisions on who is on the roster, who is your starter, who's your Sam linebacker, with also out not showing anybody anything? Good luck with that, JG.
Well, I think what we're seeing in joint practice is a little different than what you guys are seeing in the preseason, and not to get into full detail, but they're more of a hybrid defense than you're seeing in games. And frankly, I think I said this to John the other day, I think there's a window dressing on top of what we're seeing as well. They're going through walkthroughs. There's stuff that they're doing behind the scenes that we're not privy to. And I think Look, I think they're starting 3 linebackers. We can talk about the Sam linebacker being unique or whatever, but I think their starting 3 linebackers are going to be fairly predictable. I think they're going to be Alex Singleton, TJ Edwards, and Eric Wilson. I think you'll see TJ Edwards play Mike. I think you'll see Wilson play Will, and I think you'll see Singleton play Sam. And Singleton has experience in hybrid defenses. He's a good blitzer. He can cover. I have no issue with that. I think there's some window dressing there. I mean, think about it this way. Okay, here's how they're selling this. So they had Joe Osman, Jannard Avery, and Patrick Johnson, a 7th-round pick at Sam linebacker. That's essentially saying, hey, guys, how can we make guy number 51, 52, and 53 a starting linebacker? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think you have to follow into the context clues. I know a lot of people have been musing about Ryan Kerrigan playing linebacker. I mean, the guy hasn't practiced in 3 weeks, and I don't think that he is the coverage man you'd want there. I think he's going to be part of that defensive end rotation. You also, I brought up injuries. Derek Barnett's got a shoulder injury. There's rumors that he could be on the trade block. Like there's a lot going on, and so I think they're going to take what they took from joint practices, which they were dominant in, and move from there. And I think, the preseason, you're going to see a lot of vanilla I mean, John, talk your ear off because he's covered 65 separate preseasons.
Nice.
Pre-merger. But I think what they're believers in practice. Like, they're preachers of practice. They're not preachers of the preseason. And so I think they're bringing their Bible or their playbook into the regular season from what they have from practice, not the preseason.
Yeah, Mike, you bring up a good point with all the machinations. You mentioned all the injuries. So they have to make decisions. You have to keep Rodney McLeod. I mean, he's going to be ready. Might not be ready week 1, but certainly not going to be out for 6 weeks. Tyree Jackson might be the most difficult decision because that's sort of a 2-month injury. It's not season ending, but you got to make, how much is the developmental process worth versus shutting them down? You mentioned some of the other guys. Then you talk about the best and veteran guys who maybe you don't want to guarantee. You don't want to keep them on the week 1 roster. So the Richard Rodgers of the world, T.Y. McGill, is Hassan Ridgeway vested? He might be in that category as well. How do you balance that? How many of these young guys, how many of these young injured guys do you just carry on the roster because you want to keep them? Tyree Jackson would be the most notable, but even lesser guys. You mentioned Craig James. He's back at practice. He's ready to play. He's a great special teams player. You need corners in this league. Is this the most difficult year when you're trying to figure out the 53?
Well, I think it's interesting because unlike last year, you have a preseason now, so other teams are looking at what you have. I think they've learned from the Noah Togiai situation, even though he just got cut by Indianapolis with an injury waiver. Look, I think Tyree Jackson's a guy that you get excited about and you say, cool, it's worth cutting the 6th wide receiver, which I'm sure you and I will get into later on in this show because I'm very intrigued by this going into this game. That said, on defense, you look at it this way. You're not going to cut Davion Taylor, right? So you have to keep Sean Bradley because you need a stack linebacker to back up those 3 guys at Will and Mike. Like, you're not going to move TJ Edwards to Will. That's going to put you at a disadvantage. Then you also have Patrick Johnson, who I think has been the most impressive of the 3 guys that were initially listed as Sam. And, oh, by the way, Jannard Avery's injured. And frankly, I don't think he's that good anyway. At corner, Zach McPherson will back up the outside spots, but there's no true backup nickel. I think Josiah Scott's done enough to make this roster. But I think when you look at the versatility that Craig James has, you have to factor that in. He can play nickel, he can play outside, and he's a special teams ace. So that could cost Scott a job, especially if you keep 5 safeties. Now, you bring up vested veterans, and I know I'm talking a mile a minute here, but Andrew Adams, okay? He's been rolling with the first team defense the last week and has looked fantastic opposite Anthony Harris. I think Marcus Epps is going to make this team. I think they like him on special teams. They like what he can do. Kayvon Wallace is dealing with a groin injury. I like what I've seen from Elijah Riley, but do you really want to trust Marcus Epps opposite Anthony Harris when you can have a guy like Andrew Adams who's made plays, who's been around in the league? He's not making a ton of money. Who cares about his contract being fully guaranteed? If they cut him this week, he's going to be back in week 2 anyway. But the guy will give you the number 3 safety job. You just got cut by the Eagles who thought you were the 5th guy. You know what I mean? So I don't think that makes a ton of sense. He was their first signing. They went out of their way to sign him. I think he's going to stick around. I think when you look at trying to maneuver the vested veteran stuff, I think McGill, Hargrave, and Rodgers are your guy. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd be able to cut them all and bring them all back the next week and do a full service oil change after week 1. But I just don't be cute. Don't be cute. I think, you know what I mean? Jody knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like we've seen this before where the Eagles get cute. They got very lucky with Crevon LeBlanc last year.
Yeah.
That he didn't sign elsewhere. Because I'll tell you this, he had a ton of interest. And he's a loyal guy, and he stayed loyal. And also something you have to consider, too, is the waiver wire. I think this is going to be the most active waiver wire in the history of the league. Like, normally you see about 30 guys get claimed. This is going to be upwards of 60.
Now, see, here's where I disagree with you.
Okay.
Jody and I have talked about this. COVID protocols.
Right.
I think it makes it more desirous to keep your own guys because you have that whole ramp up period to get people out of the building. I think, if anything, it should make the waiver wire a little bit less busy. So
I'm going to create some great radio for you guys, and I'm going to argue with you and tell you you're not correct.
I like it.
There are 12 days in between week 1 and the final cutdown deadline. There's a reason for that. It's so that people can do their research. They're going to be sharing medicals. It's just like when we talk about the combine. You and I talk about it every year. Teams share medicals. It's a known fact. But I do think COVID protocols will be highly, taken into account. But when you look at the numbers, it's going to be hard to. I think every team's going to claim at least 1 or 2 players. That's what I'm saying. That's how you get that number 60, right?
Okay.
I think it's weird that we haven't seen an August trade from Howie Roseman because that is really his thing. I got it last year because last year there's so much unknown. Look at Andre Dillard. Look at Derek Barnett. I'm a little iffy on the Derek Barnett shoulder injury. I mean, he was out there, and Howie and Joe, they're out there. But I think, those are the 2 names to watch that are legitimate names that could factor into the roster buildup, because now Howie, after this, the Eagles are at an advantage, by the way. They have the early preseason games. There's still preseason games to be played on Saturday and Sunday. They can spend the next 4 days shopping whoever they want. They could also cut guys early and try to sneak them through the waiver wire. So I think Howie's going to be extremely strategic here. He hasn't really made a lot of moves. The only guys that they've brought in are local dudes who know that they're camp bodies, I'm pretty sure. And so he's been very patient. And Howie likes to sit and wait and then strike, and there's like a flurry. And I think that's basically what's going to happen here. I think it's going to be an exciting weekend for Eagles fans.
The one thing I think you need to keep in mind, Michael, you're right. There's an extra amount of time build up before that first game that gives you the ability to get past whatever COVID issues you have to. However, and I know it's the case with the Eagles, they figured out exactly how they're going to spend every minute of available practice time during those 2 weeks, because they didn't practice all that much leading up to this final preseason game. So whatever hour and 20 minutes they're going to spend each day in practice that you guys aren't going to be able to watch, Nick Sirianni's already accounted for it. And I think every other team has as well. So, yes, there is a little bit more flexibility just getting a guy in, but they're going to be working on things, and they're going to need that to get ready for the regular season, because it was only 3 preseason games rather than 4. So it isn't like they're all going to be sitting around for 2 weeks waiting for the first game. They're going to be implementing things they're going to be putting in practice, and that if the guy's not ready to do it, that is a hindrance.
Counterpoint. You can raise 2 guys up from the practice squad to fill in the spots of the guys that are learning the system. So you could say, let's say you claim an offensive lineman and a corner, those two can be inactive the first week. You're going to raise up Kaye Seymour and Rosh Piersbacher from the lineup to fill in the numbers. So that's what I would say. That's my counter.
Okay, there's more flexibility as per the rules.
Yeah, there is.
Those guys are in the system.
Since you went there already, we'll let you go there. Wide receiver position. Yeah, you sound very intrigued as to how they're going to handle the cut downs for the wide receiver. Tell us why.
Yeah, I think we need to be honest here. I've been at all 17 practices. I watched all of these guys. Quez Watkins, Jalen Reagor, and Devontae Smith are a very good trio. After that, bunch of replaceable talent. Greg Ward, mostly just a slot receiver, replaceable player. Really good guy, really good story, good leader, cool, whatever. Travis Fulgham has dropped a lot of passes this summer. I know there have been back and forths about, hey, he's been playing better than you think he is, or whatever. That's not true. He's not had a good summer. I've been covering football for almost, professionally for over a decade. I know what a drop pass looks like. So he's a guy who I think will make the roster. He's a good special teams player. He's a very good blocker. I think this game's huge for him, for his role. I think he'll be here. But when we talk about role, being that fourth wide receiver is a very important thing in an offensive-friendly system. Guys need time off. Guys need to take a series off. You're going to need to be that next guy. Oh, and by the way, he's the biggest wide receiver on the roster who's probably going to make it. Greg Ward could stick around. He's a guy who's a leader. He's a special teams guy. They like him. He's got sure hands. Awesome. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's like the depth there is kind of like, based on this summer, has not really stepped up, and they've been given every opportunity to step up. Then we get into the sixth wide receiver spot. If they're going to keep a sixth guy, I brought up all those injuries before. That could deter them from keeping a sixth guy, and we have two former draft picks that we need to talk about. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, John Hightower. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside has been given every single opportunity to make this team. They've had him with the first team as the slot receiver. They've moved him around. They've done everything. I've yet to see a reason why they should keep him. John Hightower was injured for like 10 days, missed some preseason action. I've yet to see why you would keep him over maybe a waiver wire claim. So those two guys need to step up. Well, all four of those guys really need to step up because they're competing for 2 or 3 spots. And you got to be honest here. Like, this is for objective journalists. Like, you can't just be like, well, Travis Fulgham was a great story last year. He's been forgettable this offseason. So is Greg Ward. So is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. So has John Hightower. All these guys have potential, but if you're basing it all off practice, which is what Nick Sirianni has alluded to, Travis Fulgham and Greg Ward were playing into the fourth quarter last week. So were J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and John Hightower, and none of them caught passes. Like, that's telling. So I think that they're going to have to figure out the wide receiver group. I think they need to bring in a veteran, frankly. Not somebody who's, like, notable, but as I reported last week, they're not going to trade a draft pick for a player at wide receiver. They just don't. They're not going to – they're all in on 2022. They want to compete this year. They think they can compete. But 2022 is their nest egg, and they know it, and they don't really want to trade future assets to just kind of upgrade the fifth wide receiver spot.
All right, let's talk about trades, though, Mike, because you brought up, I went through it yesterday. I think I came out with 15 August trades for Howie Roseman. Last year, as you mentioned, nothing. A lot of players on this roster. You mentioned a couple of the obvious ones, Andre Dillard, perhaps Derek Barnett, perhaps the New York Jets, who need a pass rusher with Carl Lawson going down. Jody knows that. A lot of under the radar guys. Can you get something for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside? Can you get something for a Matt Pryor in an offensive line deficient league? I got to be honest. This team's they have 14 offensive linemen left. You could argue they're all 14 of them are NFL level players. They can't keep 14. So Zach Ertz, we never talk about anymore. There's still the Teddy Bridgewater scenario out there. Is this team going to make a trade? Are they going to make multiple trades? Is this how we kind of fix the roster situation on the back end by shipping guys out of here?
Well, let's pull an Ace Ventura and go. The Eagles are all in on 2022. They think they can compete this year, but they don't want to give away their nest egg. So yes, I do think that there is a possibility of a trade. But here's the thing that I will say. I think it's more likely that they're player-for-player trades than there are draft pick trades. As much as teams seem to be willing to give away late-round picks, the assets you were talking about, Derek Barnett, Andre Dillard, former first-round picks, it's very hard to sell a fan base on, hey, we just traded Andre Dillard for a seventh-round pick.
Yeah.
Because realistically, that's what you're looking at. Because Greg Little, who has played more games, who was drafted 15 or 16 spots later in the same draft, got a seventh-round pick for the Panthers. So realistically, that's what you're basing stuff on. Oh, by the way, Greg Little's a little bit more versatile than Andre Dillard, and hasn't had constant, rumors about mental stuff and versatility issues, etc. So I think you can sell Andre Dillard for a starting level wide receiver or a starting level slot receiver. Like if I told you that the Eagles traded Andre Dillard for Jameson Crowder, what would you say?
I would say that's a heck of a trade,
right,
for the Eagles' perspective.
Right, that's what I mean. Like if with Derek Barnett, to me, if you're not getting a third round pick for him, you shouldn't trade him. That's kind of where I'm at, because here's the thing: if he has as good of a year as I think he's going to, let's say he gets 8 sacks, you're going to get a third round compensatory pick. And that's how Howie Roseman looks at stuff like this. So, but Matt Pryor is somebody who is really interesting to me. I think that's a player for player trade worth making. I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't happen last week. And so, yeah, I think that there is room to trade offensive linemen. I think another guy who kind of makes sense is T.Y. McGill. If you can get another player, or Hassan Ridgeway, if you can get another player to fill another spot, I think their depth at defensive end and defensive tackle is terrific. Their depth on the offensive line is terrific. I think wide receiver, if you can sell somebody on the potential of other guys, sure. I do think they're going to make at least 2 waiver claims.
All right. This is an either-or question. Pretty simple. The Eagles' third-string quarterback will be Nick Mullins or anyone not named Nick Mullins?
Anyone not named Nick Mullins. I think they're going to look into. I think they're going to look into a younger guy who they can develop into a long-term cheap backup. I think that's the goal. That was the goal with Jalen Hurts initially. He was a guy who had premium talent, but they felt like they could develop into a long-term backup. Ooh, that blew up in their face. And then, I want to say this before I get off the podcast. Jalen Hurts has earned this starting job, in my opinion.
Well, how do you not when you get every first-team rep in practice?
Right, but yeah, that's fair. But I also think he's played well. I think those practices with the Patriots kind of woke up a sleeping playmaker on the field. Like, I think he does better against, constant competition as opposed to, oh, wow, I'm throwing to air to Greg Ward for the 80 millionth time. You know what I mean? So there's that. But I would say there's going to be some young guys. Anthony Gordon, who was cut by the Chiefs, I think would make a lot of sense for this offense. I'm actually kind of surprised they didn't sign him. He was cut earlier this week. I'm kind of surprised they didn't sign him to take up reps. I guess, Nick Mullins is shopping himself to the league today. Like, this is a big game for him. He's been thrown into action with guys that have not played well and have led to interceptions. I mean, Jack Stahl, off his hands, interception. His 2 other interceptions, Adrian Killens got cut because he ran the wrong route, I'm pretty sure. And then the other one was just like a overthrow. But anyway, I think, I think it's somebody other than Nick Mullins.
All right. Michael Kaye with us, NJ.com. Make sure you read Mike's work there. Also, friend of the show, Chris Franklin, does a great job with Mike at NJ.com, as I said. I want to talk to you about the back end of the draft, Mike, because this is the first year in a while the Eagles have had these late round picks. Now, Patrick Johnson, we've talked a lot. He seems to have an easier path than maybe the 6th-round picks to make this roster. Marlon Tuipulotu, I think, has been the most disappointing rookie. But then you have that Teron Jackson, Jacoby Stevens duo. Really difficult numbers game for Teron Jackson. Jacoby Stevens has been hurt. How do you get those two guys on the roster? Can you get those two guys on the roster?
I don't see a world where it happens. I actually think Davian Taylor's injury affects Stevens in a way that he probably wouldn't have been affected otherwise. If Davian Taylor's healthy, I think you keep Stevens over Bradley, but you need somebody who can be a backup middle linebacker and a backup weak side linebacker. And Stevens, to me, is just an outside linebacker. I'm not putting him against guards. So, I think that's going to be difficult. The defensive end, I think it's a matter of if Derek Barnett's here, right? Because even then, you've got Brandon Graham, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat and Ryan Kerrigan in front of him. So really a defensive end it's an embarrassment of riches. And so from that perspective, it's going to be hard for Teron Jackson to make the team. He was a 6th-round pick. I think he'll get through waivers. Yeah. Mr. T, Marlon T, was supposed to be a really good run defender. He's been thrown around in the preseason like relentlessly. He did have a really, really good practice on Wednesday. A really, really good practice on Wednesday. Had 2 tackles for loss, was just blowing up offensive linemen. But again, the Jets can't block anybody this week. So you've got to take that into account. I think you can get him through waivers. But he's got no shot. And then talk about Patrick Johnson. I was impressed by Patrick Johnson for preseason game number 1. I had not noticed him at all in training camp before that. He seems to be a gamer. He's a guy who's converting from defensive end to linebacker. If they're going to really use a hybrid system, if you trust Alex Singleton to play Sam and be a starter and Patrick Johnson can learn, I think it makes a lot of sense. He's a good fit for that position. He seems to move very well in space. He seems to actually have a very good football IQ and feel for the game and where he needs to be. I've been incredibly impressed by him, honestly. I think he, outside of Milton Williams and Devontae Smith, I think he's been the most impressive, consistently impressive since the start of the preseason.
All right, this is a key question that Eagle fans want answered. They might not like your answer, but I want you to give it to them just the same. Last year, despite being 4-9-1 going into week 16 of a 17-week season, the Eagles were still mathematically alive. There was absolutely a path for the Eagles to finish out and win the NFC least. Will we be in that same position this year in week 17 of an 18-week season? Because you got to factor in a bye and an extra game. So week 17, 1 week to go prior to the last game of the year, will the Eagles still have a mathematical chance to win the division?
No, but they will have a mathematical chance of making the playoffs.
Really? Are you kidding me? You think that they're going to be in wild card territory? No shot.
With that 7th seed? Sure. With that
no shot. Seventh seed, the last wild card will have a better record than the winner of the NFC East again.
All right.
Okay.
I want to call
you into that bet. I think they're going to be very middling. I think you guys are going to be really.
I got 8 and 9. I think they're a middling team. That's what I said.
I have it between 7-10 and 9-8. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a lot like 2016, where they're going to start off really well because nobody really knows what they're doing. They've got a mobile quarterback who's dynamic. They've got really good offensive and defensive line play, and then maybe in that second half, you see the wheels kind of fall off a little bit.
All right, the last one from me, Mike, the most important one. I think for all Eagles fans, your early thoughts on CM Punk returning to the world of professional wrestling.
Brilliant. I'm done with WWE. No, seriously. Here's something that I've said to friends, and I don't know if I've said to you. I think AEW benefits from the DVR era, more than any other competitor WWE has ever had, because AEW has so many different segments and so many different options for programming. And WWE, everything's like a soap opera, so it has the same tone. It's like watching a CW show. You can't really fast forward through it if you like one element of it. So I think the DVR is going to really help AEW close the gap. I think WWE will win because of family-friendly programming. But as somebody who is taking this in as an adult, and my kid's not watching it, I'd rather watch what AEW, the 3 segments I like from AEW.
Question on timing with CM Punk. AEW kicked off what, 2 years ago? Have they gotten 2 full years?
Yeah, I think so.
Why wasn't CM Punk part of their beginning? Why did he wait? Why did they wait? I know that it takes 2 to tango, so maybe one wanted to, the other one didn't. Why is CM Punk and AEW just seemed a natural fit from the day AEW was conceived that he would be there day one? Why do you think it didn't happen that way?
Well,
why wasn't I on your first 10 shows?
Yeah. I think I did. I probably asked you, and you probably said you couldn't do it. From my perspective, and Mike knows Tony Khan as well, and Tony will learn this quickly. This is not an easy guy to deal with, so be prepared. That's why. That's the only reason.
Well, I think this too. I think Tony. I remember Tony pitching me AEW like in a bar. Like I genuinely remember him pitching. He goes, "Do you think a wrestling federation can work in Jacksonville?" And this was like, I want to say it was like 2017, and I laughed at him. I mean, it was like
everybody laughed. Yeah. His dad laughed then,
right? And so, but he's a guy who thinks so far ahead.
He loves it.
That's the thing. Like, he's not selling a product; he's selling a passion, and I think. Yeah. Look, you can crash and burn, but like when you look at WCW was given all this money from Ted Turner because he was passionate about it. And then once it became corporate and they sold off assets, it became this joke of a product. WWE has had the same guy running it since before I was born. So like they're 2 different animals. And I also don't think that you need to beat WWE. You just have to.
You can't from a monetary
It's impossible.
Standpoint. Yeah.
But a win for them is creating their own sect of fan base. And a lot of people complain about how they only cater to the indie people. Well, bringing in CM Punk is catering to everyone. Bringing in somebody like Daniel Bryan, who's rumored to be there, is catering to everyone. Chris Jericho caters to everyone. I think Chris Jericho is the most valuable wrestler of the last 20 years. Because of what he's been able to accomplish. Like John Cena is the best draw ever. So is Brock Lesnar. Those are the 2 biggest draws ever. Like you could talk about Hulk Hogan, that's cool, whatever. He had a great run. But Brock Lesnar.
Steve Austin, I would argue.
Yeah, Steve Austin. Yeah, that's fair. But back then, everybody was good. The Rock was there. Like it was a good product. WWE isn't a good product anymore. It's not. It's a stream.
I think at the top, it's tremendously good. I think the Roman Reigns is the best in the industry right now. John Cena, but it's only the summer of Cena. He's on a different level. That's why he's in Hollywood.
But John, we talk about this with NFL depth charts. You're only as good as your depth.
You're right. You're right. The stuff underneath is terrible. But then I would argue with Tony Khan. This is where Tony loses me. The Orange Cassidys of the world, the Darby Allins of the world. And those guys are very limited. Those guys are very limited. And by the way, Dan Lambert, for people who don't know Dan Lambert, he's the best promo guy in the business. He shouldn't be a better promo than your wrestlers, with the exception of Chris Jericho. But Dan Lambert's the best promo guy they got. And the guys who really click, the Cenas, the people at the very, very top, it's all about promos.
Sure. You got to sell me. You got to tell me why this is important. I've seen a wrestling match before.
Yes, you have. And we can tell by talking to you that you're passionate about it. Maybe not Tony Khan passionate, but passionate just the same. You got 2 big wrestling fans with you here today.
Now, Jacksonville fans would like Tony to be passionate about the football team. That's a problem.
No comment. Not going to touch that one. I'll talk about Tony.
And by the way, the soccer fans, the Khans also, what they own? Fulham?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say.
Soccer prince, yeah.
Here's what I'll say while we're talking about Tony. I think Tony's passionate about everything. The dude never sleeps. But I think there is something to be said about putting everything you have into one product, right?
You got to pick. You got to pick one.
Yeah, you've got.
He's going to pick wrestling, by the way.
Which he should. Frankly, he's brilliant at it. Look, scouting and analytics are fun. Running a soccer team is probably really fun. But realistically, these are 3 global brands. You can't be everywhere. So,
yeah.
He'll leave the football team to his dad, just a guess. Hey, Michael, good stuff. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. John will see you up in the broadcast booth. I'm in section 234 if you want to wave. Have a good time at the game tonight.
Have a great one, guys. Thanks for having me.
Mike.
Michael Kaye from NJ.com here with us on Birds 365. All right, we're running late. We're only going to have a couple of minutes left to put a bow on the show. Stay right there.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.